When the local homeowners association decided to expand their irrigation system, they didn't ask permission. One morning, I walked out to see my fence line cut and trenches dug across my pasture. They had laid pipes straight through my property, as if it were their own. No letter, no knock on my door. At first, I tried diplomacy. I asked them to reroute or compensate. They dismissed me, saying it was for the greater good. That arrogance lit a fire in me. I did some digging of my own, into records, deeds, and water rights. And that's when I found it. The HOA's entire water system came from a single spring that was on land privately owned and up for sale. So I bought it. Within weeks, the HOA pipes running across my land were worthless. I controlled the source, and I turned off the supply until they came to the table. For the first time, they understood that respect, not entitlement, governs good neighbors. Sometimes the best way to deal with those who trample your boundaries is not through anger, but through strategy.
Boundaries are one of the most fundamental aspects of human relationships, communities, and property rights, yet they are often underestimated until someone crosses them. When we talk about boundaries, we tend to think of physical ones first: fences, walls, gates, or property lines. These are tangible, visible markers that separate one person's space from another's. But boundaries extend far beyond the physical. They are also emotional, social, legal, and ethical. They shape how we interact with others and define the space in which mutual respect can exist. When an HOA cut fences and laid pipe across land without permission, it was not just a violation of property. It was a violation of trust, of consent, and of the basic principle that respect must be mutual in any community. The concept of respecting boundaries is as old as civilization itself. The earliest property laws and agreements were put into place to prevent disputes over land and resources. The idea was simple. When people agree where one person's rights end and another's begin, cooperation becomes possible. Boundaries protect both sides. They ensure that one party does not exploit another, and they create stability in communities. But when a boundary is ignored, conflict follows. This is because people are hardwired to value fairness and to defend what they feel is rightfully theirs. In an educational sense, the lesson here is that respecting boundaries is not optional if harmony is the goal. Whether we are talking about land ownership, professional relationships, or personal connections, crossing boundaries without permission communicates disregard. It sends the message that the other person's needs or rights are less important, and that breeds resentment. In the HOA case, the act of cutting fences and laying pipes without approval symbolized entitlement, as though one group's convenience outweighed another individual's ownership. This imbalance of respect is what fuels disputes. Understanding boundaries also requires understanding power. Boundaries are a way of balancing power between parties. When boundaries are honored, both sides have an equal say in how interactions unfold. When they are ignored, one side assumes control, often at the expense of the other. This is why property rights are so fiercely defended in law. They prevent the strong from taking advantage of the weak. Teaching this lesson means showing that boundaries are not about division or selfishness, but about fairness and cooperation. If neighbors are to coexist peacefully, each must know where their influence ends and the other's begins. On a deeper level, boundaries reflect respect for autonomy. Every person and community deserves the right to decide how their space, resources, or time is used. When someone cuts a fence or disregards a rule, they strip away that autonomy. It is not only damaging materially, it is damaging psychologically because it undermines the dignity of choice. Imagine how demoralizing it is for someone to watch others act on their land without permission, as though their consent has no value. This erosion of dignity is often more painful than the physical damage itself. That is why conflicts over boundaries are so charged with emotion. They are more than just property. They are about recognition and respect. Another important educational point is that boundaries are also preventative. They stop small disagreements from becoming larger disputes. When lines are drawn clearly and honored, there is little room for confusion or exploitation. The HOA could have avoided all trouble by simply engaging in dialogue, asking for permission, and working out a fair arrangement. By ignoring that step, they not only caused conflict, but also revealed how easily a lack of boundary respect can escalate into hostility. Communities thrive not when people take what they want, but when they build agreements that benefit all while honoring individual rights. Boundaries are also a mirror of character. How someone treats the boundaries of others reflects their values. Those who respect boundaries demonstrate integrity, humility, and accountability. They acknowledge that their convenience does not outweigh another person's rights. Those who ignore boundaries show entitlement and disregard for fairness. Teaching this lesson highlights the idea that character is often tested not in big gestures, but in how we treat the invisible lines that belong to others. Ultimately, the educational takeaway from this story is that boundaries matter because they preserve respect, balance power, and maintain harmony. They are the framework on which cooperation rests. Ignoring them invites conflict, but honoring them creates trust. Just as fences protect land and ownership deeds protect rights, social and personal boundaries protect dignity and fairness. Respect must always be mutual, or the foundation of community crumbles. And when people learn to respect boundaries in every aspect of life, they not only prevent disputes, but also create an environment where cooperation and fairness can flourish.
When confronted with conflict, the instinctive reaction for many people is to strike back immediately, to match force with force, or to respond to disrespect with anger. Yet history and experience show us that the wiser approach is to begin with diplomacy, to extend the opportunity for peaceful resolution before resorting to confrontation. Diplomacy first, but without accepting disrespect, is a principle that carries value in property disputes, professional disagreements, and personal relationships alike. It is about holding space for dialogue, compromise, and mutual understanding, while never surrendering the core of one's dignity or rights. In the case of an HOA cutting fences and laying pipe across someone's land, the property owner could have retaliated immediately, perhaps by tearing up the pipes or taking aggressive legal action. Instead, they chose to first approach the issue diplomatically, requesting rerouting or compensation. This is important because it shows willingness to resolve issues constructively. The educational lesson here is that giving diplomacy a chance reflects maturity and self-control. It communicates to others that you are not driven by rash impulses, but by reason and fairness. This strengthens one's credibility and often makes others more willing to listen. Diplomacy begins with communication. It requires expressing concerns clearly, explaining the impact of the other party's actions, and proposing solutions. It does not mean avoiding hard truths or sugarcoating the issue. Rather, it means presenting them in a way that allows the other side to engage without feeling attacked. This form of communication often de-escalates tension and opens the door to cooperation. When someone crosses a boundary, starting with dialogue shows that you value resolution more than conflict. It is a signal that you are not against the person or group, but against the action that violated your rights. However, diplomacy does not mean weakness, nor does it mean tolerating ongoing disrespect. Too often, people confuse patience and politeness with surrender. Effective diplomacy has limits. When the other party refuses to acknowledge wrongdoing or continues to dismiss legitimate concerns, then firmer measures become necessary. The strength of diplomacy lies in balance, extending the hand of peace first, but also making it clear that you will defend your position if that offer is ignored. In educational terms, this balance teaches us to pair empathy with firmness.
By doing so, we avoid being exploited while still maintaining integrity. One of the reasons diplomacy is powerful is that it preserves relationships where possible. Not every disagreement needs to escalate into lasting hostility. In neighborhoods, workplaces, and families, people must often coexist long after disputes are settled. Starting with diplomacy allows both sides to maintain dignity and makes reconciliation possible. For example, had the HOA accepted the landowner's initial request for rerouting or compensation, both parties could have avoided long-term bitterness. The ability to coexist peacefully after conflict is often determined by whether diplomacy was attempted in the beginning. Another key point is that diplomacy strengthens one's legal and moral standing. In disputes, especially property or business conflicts, courts and communities look favorably on those who attempted peaceful resolution first. It shows good faith and reasonableness. When stronger measures become necessary, such as legal action or strategic countermoves, they carry more weight because it is clear they were not taken lightly or impulsively. Thus, diplomacy not only preserves dignity, but also builds a foundation of fairness that supports firmer actions later if required. This principle also translates to personal growth. Practicing diplomacy cultivates patience, listening skills, and the ability to see multiple perspectives. It teaches restraint, which is one of the hardest but most valuable disciplines in life. People who can approach conflict diplomatically often earn respect from others, even from opponents, because they show mastery over emotions and commitment to resolution. These are qualities of strong leaders and fair neighbors. Finally, the lesson of diplomacy first, but don't accept disrespect, emphasizes self-worth. It reminds us that while kindness and understanding are virtues, they should never come at the cost of dignity. It is possible to be compassionate without being a doormat, and to be firm without being cruel. This balance is the heart of effective conflict resolution. The property owner's decision to attempt dialogue before exercising control over the water source illustrates how diplomacy allows one to act with integrity while still defending what is rightfully theirs. In sum, beginning with diplomacy is not just about resolving disputes. It is about cultivating respect, preserving relationships, and strengthening one's position. It demonstrates maturity and fairness while ensuring that rights are not overlooked. And when diplomacy fails, it provides the moral foundation for decisive action. The greatest strength lies not in avoiding conflict altogether, but in handling it in a way that honors both peace and self-respect.
Knowledge has always been one of the most powerful forms of leverage, often outweighing physical strength, money, or even authority. The saying, "information is power," is not just a cliché. It is a reflection of how societies, businesses, and individuals gain the upper hand in conflicts and negotiations. In the case of the landowner who discovered that the HOA's water source was vulnerable, it was not brute force or anger that turned the tables, but careful research and strategic use of information. This highlights a broader educational truth. The more informed you are, the more control you have over outcomes in nearly every area of life. Knowledge creates leverage because it reduces uncertainty. When one side understands the details of a situation better than the other, they can make smarter decisions and anticipate problems before they arise. In property disputes, this means knowing the legal boundaries, water rights, or zoning laws that govern the land. In business, it means understanding contracts, markets, or customer needs. In personal relationships, it means being aware of emotions, intentions, and histories. By uncovering the fact that the HOA system depended on a single spring that could be purchased, the landowner turned what seemed like a hopeless invasion into a position of strength. It was knowledge, not confrontation, that shifted the balance of power. The process of gathering knowledge also teaches patience and discipline. Unlike rash actions that may provide temporary relief, informed decisions build lasting advantages.
Research requires digging into records, asking questions, and sometimes consulting experts. This effort often feels slow, but it pays off in clarity and confidence. Many people rush into conflicts without gathering facts and end up in worse positions because they act on assumptions rather than evidence. The educational lesson here is that knowledge is an investment. Every piece of information gathered before making a move increases the likelihood of success and reduces the risk of mistakes. Another reason knowledge provides leverage is that it allows for creativity in problem solving. When you fully understand a situation, you see opportunities that others overlook. The HOA assumed their actions would go unchallenged because they believed the landowner had no real options. They miscalculated because they lacked information about the spring's ownership. The landowner, however, turned an apparent disadvantage into an advantage by thinking strategically and using knowledge to identify a solution that was not obvious. This principle applies universally. Whether negotiating a contract, managing resources, or resolving disputes, the person with deeper insight can often find win-win outcomes or, when necessary, decisive ways to protect their interests. Knowledge also builds credibility. When you walk into a discussion with facts, documents, or well-reasoned arguments, others take you more seriously. People respect those who clearly understand the issues at hand, even if they disagree with them. In conflicts, being informed shows that your position is not based on emotion alone, but on substance. This credibility not only strengthens your ability to negotiate, but also influences how others, such as courts, communities, or neutral observers, perceive the situation. It is also important to understand that knowledge is not static. It must be updated and expanded. Laws change, markets shift, and circumstances evolve. Those who continually learn and stay curious maintain their leverage, while those who rely on outdated information lose ground. In the context of community disputes, staying aware of changes in property law, environmental regulations, or neighborhood policies can mean the difference between being blindsided and being prepared. Knowledge requires ongoing effort, but it is precisely that effort which ensures that power is not lost over time. Perhaps the most valuable lesson about knowledge and leverage is that it empowers people to act strategically rather than react emotionally. Emotional reactions can lead to escalation, damaged relationships, and poor decisions. Knowledge, by contrast, creates space for calm, calculated responses that maximize benefits and minimize harm. The landowner's choice to research before acting demonstrates how informed decisions turn conflict into opportunity. Instead of being a victim of disregard, they became the party with control. In education and personal development, this principle encourages lifelong learning. It reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is not only about curiosity, but also about resilience and empowerment. People who seek knowledge are better equipped to navigate challenges, resist exploitation, and influence their own futures. The difference between feeling powerless and feeling capable often lies in the amount of information one possesses and how it is applied. In conclusion, leverage comes from knowledge because it transforms uncertainty into clarity, weakness into strength, and conflict into opportunity. It allows individuals to anticipate, adapt, and act with confidence. The story of the landowner demonstrates that the most effective power is often quiet, rooted not in force, but in understanding. By valuing research, strategy, and insight, anyone can create leverage in their life, ensuring that they are not at the mercy of circumstances, but active shapers of their outcomes.
Turning the tables without bitterness is one of the most powerful demonstrations of strength and maturity. It is natural to feel anger when wronged, especially when someone disregards your rights or treats your property, time, or dignity with disrespect. Many people assume that the only way to reclaim power is through retaliation fueled by resentment. However, lasting solutions and true empowerment come when actions are taken strategically without being consumed by bitterness. In the story of the landowner and the HOA, the decision to buy the water source and shut off the supply was not about revenge, it was about reclaiming control and teaching respect. The important educational lesson here is that resolution, not revenge, should be the goal when confronting unfairness. When people act out of bitterness, their decisions are often short-sighted. Bitterness clouds judgment, making it easy to focus on punishing the other side, rather than creating a sustainable outcome. This can escalate conflicts, damage relationships beyond repair, and sometimes even backfire. For example, had the landowner lashed out destructively, perhaps by sabotaging the pipes or yelling at the HOA board, it might have led to legal trouble or reinforced the association's dismissive view of their concerns. By staying calm and finding a calculated solution, they not only defended their rights, but also gained respect. This shows that calm strength often accomplishes more than explosive anger. Turning the tables without bitterness also allows one to maintain dignity. When someone is wronged, they risk losing twice, once from the violation itself, and again if their response lowers them to the same level as those who disrespected them. By avoiding bitterness, a person protects their integrity and ensures that their actions reflect their values rather than their frustrations. In many ways, this is a deeper victory than simply winning a dispute. It demonstrates that even under pressure, you are guided by principle, not pettiness. This approach also highlights the difference between punishment and correction. Punishment is often about making someone suffer for what they did, while correction is about changing behavior so the same mistake is not repeated. In the case of the HOA, shutting off the water supply was not an act of vengeance, but a way to force recognition of the landowner's rights. It created a situation where the HOA had to acknowledge boundaries and negotiate respectfully. The goal was not to destroy the association, but to restore fairness. This distinction is critical in education because it reminds us that true leadership and conflict resolution are about teaching lessons that improve relationships and systems, not just venting frustration. Another reason to avoid bitterness is that it frees emotional energy for better uses. Bitterness is draining. It keeps people stuck in cycles of anger and resentment long after the original conflict has passed. By focusing instead on resolution, individuals can direct their energy toward growth, creativity, or new opportunities. The landowner, for example, could walk away from the situation not with lingering resentment, but with the satisfaction of having turned a difficult experience into a demonstration of resilience and intelligence. This principle applies broadly, whether in disputes at work, within families, or among neighbors. Letting go of bitterness while still asserting one's rights leads to healthier outcomes. Furthermore, turning the tables without bitterness builds stronger communities and relationships. Conflicts are inevitable wherever people live or work together, but the way they are resolved determines whether communities fracture or grow stronger. When people handle disputes with fairness and composure, they set an example for others and create an environment where respect becomes the norm. In contrast, if disputes are handled with vengeance, hostility can spread, eroding trust among everyone involved. Educationally, this teaches that conflict can either be destructive or constructive, depending on how it is managed. This principle also aligns with the broader concept of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize emotions, manage them effectively, and respond thoughtfully. People who can turn the tables without bitterness demonstrate high emotional intelligence. They acknowledge their frustration, but do not allow it to control their actions. They use strategy, patience, and foresight to achieve their goals. These skills are valuable not only in property disputes, but in leadership, careers, and personal life. Finally, the absence of bitterness makes victories more meaningful. When a resolution is reached through strategy and fairness rather than spite, it feels cleaner and more rewarding. There is no lingering sense of guilt or the need to justify one's actions, only the quiet confidence that comes from doing what was right. The landowner's decision to cut off the water supply was a statement of control and principle, not of anger. It resolved the problem and set a precedent without poisoning future interactions. This kind of victory is lasting because it is rooted in respect and clarity, not hostility. In conclusion, turning the tables without bitterness is not about ignoring injustice or being passive. It is about responding in a way that restores balance without being consumed by resentment. It preserves dignity, strengthens communities, and creates sustainable solutions. It shows that true power is not only in reclaiming control, but in doing so with wisdom, composure, and fairness. By focusing on resolution instead of revenge, individuals turn conflicts into opportunities for growth and respect, ensuring that the outcome strengthens rather than weaken everyone involved.